Would you pray with me? God, we give you thanks and praise. You are so good to us even when we don't feel it. God, would you please provide us your peace, your joy, lend us your healing through my story of how your work and your story continues to be alive today. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. It is my joy and my pleasure to be with you wherever you are today. To start, I want to invite you to, I'd rather say, to imagine a scenario. I want you to imagine that you are in a 14-story building. You've been there quite a bit. Makes you anxious to walk up those stairs, but you've been there before. And it's not a place that you like to be. It's a place that you'd rather not be. It's scary, it's intrusive, and it's just not your home. And then all of a sudden, a fire breaks out. A fire breaks out and you are trapped behind the door and there is no seemingly way out. There is a window to your left and you can jump out of that, or you can wait for the fire to consume you. Which do you choose? For me, I chose to jump out the building, figuratively. You know, we're going to talk a lot today about suicide awareness. We're going to talk about depression. We're going to talk about anxiety. And one way to relate that is to imagine yourself in that scenario. So for me, one time I was in that scenario, and it didn't feel like there was any way out. There didn't feel like there was a way that the firemen would come and be there for me. So which do you choose? Sometimes it feels safer to jump. And really, that's kind of what we're going to start to talk about today. I want to tell you my story of when I was 16 years old, and that was about 22 years ago. And I took my car 70 miles into a tree to try to end my own life. I want to tell you this story because I want you to be able to understand maybe what that thought process might be like. And I'm going to do that through three main points. I'm going to talk a little bit about the mental health gap disparity. I'm going to talk a little bit about maybe how you can provide support during that time. And I'm actually going to tell you a little bit about what happened around me, what happened around my trauma. So we're going to talk about that in three ways. So first, when it happened to me, it was obviously a very, very hard time. So I was working at a Price Chopper, and I was 16. I had made the marching bands, and I was going through quite a lot. I had overcome actually drug use at the time, and I was doing that to try to suppress how I was feeling. And that's a lot of things that happen around the times whenever you're not feeling okay. You try to find ways to feel okay. You try to find people that also maybe don't feel okay. And when you're young, it seems like that is the only way to do things, is to suppress it by yourself. I wasn't getting the help I needed. When I was a kid, my dad was an alcoholic. My mom wasn't there. She was going through her own stuff. And as my dad was an alcoholic, he wasn't there for me emotionally, physically. He was always working. So for me, I had to find a way to cope by myself. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Things just got worse, and by the time I was 16, I had figured out that maybe I don't want to be doing this drug thing. I don't necessarily need to be hanging out with my friends anymore, but I still felt alone. I still felt not valued, not safe, and not in control. So for me, those were three big things. And then one day, the fire, it just kind of came. And it came out of nowhere. I wasn't even thinking before that I wanted to be done. It just seemed to me that I could not imagine continuing to struggle this much anymore. It was overwhelming. It was all-consuming. And once the thought came that I no longer want to be here, that's all I could focus on. And I had thought that before. I was cutting. I was reaching out for help, but I just was not finding a solution. So on that day, I was driving down the road. I decided that I'm not going to be here anymore. And I was going 70 miles an hour, no seatbelt, and I thought I saw a police car pulling up next to me. I had left work. I had told my friend, hey, tell my parents I'm sorry, I'm done, and I thought that maybe somebody had called. So at that point, I was at 435 in Metcalf, going east, if you're familiar with our city, and over here in Kansas City, right? And I took the car into a guardrail, aiming for an embankment. And that guardrail actually shot me off into this big open field. You'll see a picture up here, the big open field. And that field, behind it, you can see there's only apartments. There's one tree and only apartments. So as I hit that tree, I hit that dead center. And actually the tree, instead of the tree coming into the windshield, I found it going up above. Instead of me going through the windshield, I found my head hit the steering wheel, right? And the next thing I knew, everything was black. Time had passed. I don't know how much time, maybe a few minutes, maybe a little bit longer. And the door opened, and there were people everywhere. People everywhere. I could hear sirens, I could hear commotion, and I pretty much got up unscathed. I couldn't believe it. If you look at my car, if you look at this picture of my car, it was unbelievable. That car was decimated. I look over at my car with the front completely crumpled, and I'm still alive. How did I not die? Why did I not die? Why is this pain going to continue to engulf me, to surround me, to be all-consuming? So I started asking people that, and they could not answer. I mean, I can't imagine anybody answering that question. And I became really nervous because I thought maybe people were going to come and try to stop me, so I began to run. I was running, I was pretty much unscathed. I tried to jump over a fence, and that's when my life really changed. This guy stopped me, and I said, why didn't I die? Why did I die? The same question I asked everybody else, but he had an answer. He looked me dead in the eye and said, because God has a special plan for you. Now, for years, I told this story, and that was the end of the story. And then for us today, that's the beginning of the story, right? For me, I actually believe that. I still believe that. I believe that for all of us, that God has a special plan for you. I believe that right now in this moment, because I believe that somebody that you know, maybe it's you, is suffering right now. I believe that somebody is feeling the same way I did, desperate, trying to get out, wanting everything to end, not because they want to be dead, because they just can't feel this anymore. I believe that we are all here for a reason. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk a little bit about my first point, the mental health disparity gap. I think that is so important that we talk about this because sometimes we need to find hope when we are hopeless. Sometimes we need to find joy, borrow joy when we have no joy. Sometimes we have to lean into each other to find that. And for me, and I know that Chris and other people have shared this with you before, I did not find it in the church. So it's so important. It's so important that we talk about this gap. So to start, I want to share with you a quote that I saw, and it says, "It's okay to be okay unless you're not okay means you cannot show up for me day to day. It's okay to be okay unless you can't show up for me day to day." And that's a big part of it. Like sometimes when we don't feel okay, if you don't struggle with mental illness, you don't struggle with anxiety, suicide ideation, trauma, that's amazing. And for people that do, it's really challenging sometimes to send a text back. My mom texted me the other day, and I just was not feeling okay at all. And she's asked me questions. I could not even text her back. You know, I said, "Hey, sorry, I just got busy." That's not what I wanted to say. Is, "Hey, sorry, I wasn't able to even function, let alone be there for you today." And like we can't say that. Why? Because there's a huge mental health, physical disparity gap, right? There's a disparity between those, is what I'm trying to say. And why is that? Why is it that we can say, you know what, I'm not feeling okay because I'm going through chemo. You know what, I'm not feeling okay because I'm going through COVID. You know what, I'm not feeling okay, fill in the gap. Why is it that we cannot address those things? We don't feel that we can say that to even the people that we love. And I think it's because of our culture, right? And I want to start right there with the mental health disparity gap. Our culture is such that we don't feel like we can talk about it. We don't feel like we are allowed to talk about it. Whenever I went through my incident, there are a lot of things that did not go well. I was pulled out of in-person treatment, and I was not given the treatment that I needed, and I was not given the support that I needed. However, my pastor at the time came over, and he had heard about it, and it was like right after, and he said, "Josh, what happened to you that made you do this?" What happened to me that made me do this? Well, I'm a kid, so, I don't even know what I said. But think about how that feels. For years, I felt shame on the shame that I felt about. For years, I actually described this not as a suicide survival, because that's what it is. I survived suicide. I described it as an accident. Why? Because I felt shame on the shame. There is so much shame around not being okay. So why would somebody want to tell you that? Why would somebody engage whenever we feel like that? I know a friend of mine that their child is going through a lot of suicide ideation, a lot of depression. And they said two things that just was like dumbfounding to me. They said, I don't understand why my kid feels this way when they have a perfectly great home. What? It's so much deeper than that. It's not always like me. It's not always like, hey, we are not having our needs met. Sometimes we just don't feel okay because there's a biochemical disruption in our physiology in our brain. That's part of it. That can be part of it, right? Sometimes, you've maybe given them the home. However, maybe you're not even there. I don't know, right? There's so much more to it than just having a great home. And then they said this other thing that was just not helpful. I know it wouldn't be helpful for me, is like, think about what I would have gone through had they died. If you say that to somebody who's suffering, if somebody who's struggling, think about what you're going to do to me when I leave, or when you leave. That makes me feel shame on my shame. So there's all kinds of examples. I could go on and on and on. Actually, even sometime this week, somebody said, I have the perfect family. They reached out to me. They said, my niece just tried to end her life. I'm glad they reached out to me. My niece just tried to end her life. I don't know what to do. I've been there when people have been sick, but I don't know what to do when people attempt suicide. So she knows me from Facebook, reached out to me, was able to talk with her. I talked to her for 20 minutes, and she said, it's really odd because they have the perfect family. I don't understand why she would do this. And here's the deal. Here's what all of these examples are meant to provide, is it's not a rational thing. When we feel like we can't go on, it's not a rational thing at all. What it is, it's what I like to think of as a disruption or even a perversion of our own brain trying to figure out how to deal with the pain. What happens is it literally redirects your thoughts and your emotions and the way that you feel, your somatic response, in a way to try to cope, to try to survive, right? And that's so huge. And that's actually my second point. Is actually the way that trauma affects it, and then how it's kind of manifested through my own perfection, which tends to be my character traits. So, my second point, my trauma and my perfectionism. So, the thing that was so apparent to me after I started to heal from this was it was beyond depression. It was beyond just feeling anxious, whatever that means. For me, it was trauma that I had gone through as a kid that had deeply impacted my brain. So I'm going to get a little bit specific, a little bit brainy here. So whenever we undergo trauma, there is actually a way that your brain tends to cope with it. And it develops this way as a way to try to survive. So let's say you witness somebody go through a car wreck. Let's say you witness, or you go through a car wreck yourself. That tends to be something that a lot of people witness, right? What does your brain do? Well, it kind of takes a pause on everything that's happening around you, so that way you can emotionally and physically survive. That way you can get away from whatever it is that whatever the trauma is, whatever the problem is, right? Whatever the big scary tiger is. And big scary tiger is just a reference to our automatic nervous system, right? Our fight or flight. We protect ourselves. Our brain, our body is so beautifully and perfectly made that it is allowing ourselves to survive. Well, sometimes what happens is in that moment, we're not allowed to process it. We can't emotionally feel all the feelings. Now imagine that you have years upon years of trauma. Racially, imagine that, racial tension and what? Imagine that that's years upon decades upon centuries of trauma. Like, we actually know now that you can go about 10 layers deep in trauma. That affects us over 10 layers deep. So 10 generations ago, the trauma that their parents felt, we might still feel. So imagine that is how you're feeling right now, and then you're going to try to think logically about it. It doesn't happen, right? It doesn't happen. So what do we do then? We actually have a somatic response, so something that happens in our bodies that we feel. So for me, a lot of times, if I'm talking to somebody and I feel like they're not paying attention, I don't feel like I'm valued. And that actually kind of turns in my stomach. I can feel it in my heart, the center of who I am. I'm a perfectionist. For me, what is really important is being good, getting it right, whatever that matters. I want you to understand what I'm talking about. My entire adulthood, my entire childhood, it was reinforced that I wasn't enough. I was not smart enough. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't valued enough, right? So that's how I feel if somebody isn't paying attention to me. And then all of a sudden I have this somatic response. And before I can even think about it, I'm thinking they don't care. They don't care. And then all of a sudden I start getting in this idea of nobody cares. What's going on with me? What's wrong with me? I don't care. Like, people don't care about what I have to say. I'm not even worth being around. Like, what am I thinking trying to give a talk like this? Nobody's even paying attention. Like right now, you might be spacing out. You're not even paying, like, what's wrong with me? How am I here in a church giving a talk during a sermon? What's wrong with, like, do you hear where that goes? And it all comes not from a thought, but from an emotion, from a feeling that's so deep, that's so buried, that's so dark, it's so far gone that I need to heal that. And that's so important that we realize that, you know, if you want to help somebody in trauma, if you want to help somebody that's not feeling okay, they have anxiety, they have depression, don't tell them, pray more. Don't tell them, oh, you need to have more faith. Actually, just recently, I went through a pretty bad, I would say, bike accident where somebody hit me with a car, and I was putting it on Facebook. I said, man, this is really hard for me, and this is kind of my career. This is how I find joy. This is how I do life. And they said, oh, but God has a special, or not God has a special, that's my word. God is in control, right? I think God's in control. I saw God move a mountain that could not be moved. I've witnessed Him do things that I never thought were possible. He literally, I feel like, stepped in and told me, you have a plan, right? I've seen that happen before, right? And to tell me that I need to pray more is not helpful. So what do? What do we do? The most impactful, and if you don't hear anything else from this talk, hear this. The most impactful thing that we can do is get in the fire with somebody who is hurting. You know, in the book of Daniel, that's what they do with the Hebrews, right? God doesn't just throw the Hebrews into the fire, if you're familiar with that story, right? They don't just throw the people in the fire and say, okay, you're free to be burned. No, He gets in the fire with them. Jesus, He doesn't go make disciples and tell everybody to pray more. He says, go be with people, right? Go feed the poor, love your neighbor, be with people. And the most loving thing you can do is sit with somebody in their hurt. You don't even have to know they're hurt. That is so huge. If you want to show up for me and just say, Josh, dude, I'm thinking about you and I want you to know that I'm here for you. If you don't have the response for me right now, that's okay. But I want you to know that I am here and I am here and I'm willing to sit with you in your grief. I don't know your grief, but I know grief and I'm willing to sit here with. Think about that. That is powerful. That is what we can do as a church. That is what we can do as a people, as a community, right? That's what we can do in general, is we can show up for people in the most dynamic and Jesus-centered way. You don't have to preach the gospel. You don't have to tell them to be more like Jesus. You can show them who Jesus is. That is the most dynamic thing. And it may or may not help. For me, I can tell you, there have been times and seasons, and I kind of feel like I'm going through a season right now, where all I see is darkness, right? All I see is trials. All I feel like is that, oh my gosh, I am so pressed right now. Like, I am so persecuted. I just don't know, like, I'm having to borrow joy. And I still know that God is there. I get to see God work. When we are weak, He is strong, right? When we are weak, He is strong, and I still get to see God work. And a lot of times I get to see it through people because they are there for me. So actually, post-suicide attempt, I realized that I was just trying to survive, and that was okay.
And what I needed to do was heal that trauma. And a lot of times people need to heal that trauma, right? A lot of times people need to be able to find a space to overcome their own idiosyncrasies. Same with anxiety, same with depression, same with, I think, eating disorders, anything that has to do with our mental health. What we try to do is we try to heal the emotional side, then we can get there intellectually. So, and the last thing that I would really like to leave you with here today, my final point, is ways to talk back to the darkness. For me, one of the biggest things that I want to do is I want to show up right now and I want to provide light. Once you provide light, it's hard for darkness to shine, right? I just talked about maybe taking light and meeting people in their darkness, right? So how can we do that? How can we tangibly do that? I gave you some verbal examples, but what can we do to tangibly do that? So one way to do this is through support. Now, right now, actually, a family member of mine recently sought out some help for suicide ideation, and they went into a hospital, and they went to the emergency room, and they checked themselves in, and my brother-in-law was with them, and guess how long they waited? 12 hours. They checked in at 4 p.m., and they weren't seen again until 8 a.m. or so the next day. It was over 12 hours, actually. And can you imagine if you felt like I did when I was 16, to decide, hey, I want help, but then I have to sit there for a long time? That's just not going to be super helpful, right? So what can we do? Where are places that we can go? Well, one thing that you can do is we actually have a non-for-profit here called NAMI, N-A-M-I, and you can look them up online. They're a national organization, and you can kind of look to see where a NAMI is by you. And what they do is they provide kind of a social network. It's less clinical and more social, so you can have support for family members that are going through, other family members that have any suicidal thoughts, anxiety, depression. So you kind of get the resources you need. You can always do that. There's other non-for-profit organizations out there that you can kind of lean into. There's also a suicide line. Now, a lot of people say, hey, I'm not feeling suicidal. But my friend is. That's a great time for you to call the National Suicide Hotline. We'll put that up on the screen right now, the National Suicide Hotline. That is a great resource for you to have anytime that you know that somebody is feeling not okay, or maybe you yourself is feeling not okay, and it's completely confidential, it doesn't go on your record, and they're there to support you, not to talk you in or out of anything. They're there for support, right? And really that's the biggest thing is what we want to do whenever we're feeling this way is hold on for one more day, one more hour, one more minute. And all of these resources are ways that we can allow our body to do that, because you never know how you're going to feel tomorrow. I guarantee you, sometimes tomorrow is not going to be okay. The day after might be, right? So what we need to do is just hold on for one more day. Okay, so another thing that you can do is you can look at actually this relatively new type of therapy called EMDR and recursive therapy. It's in conjunction with cognitive therapy, and what it does is it actually unpacks trauma, and it allows that right brain, which we were just talking about, and the left brain to kind of communicate, to allow them to get rid of some of these feelings and get rid of some of these thought processes that you automatically think, that you're not even trying to think it. It's ingrained in your brain. It's brought up by the way that you live, the trauma that you've experienced. That's a phenomenal way to get rid of it. Recursive therapy and the same type of idea. So maybe look for organizations or clinicians that have that type of therapy. What about if I can't get into a therapist for 6 to 8 weeks, because that's the reality right now, sometimes longer. One of the most powerful and dynamic things that you can either invite somebody to do or you do yourself is give your feelings a voice. So for me, I have actually labeled the internal arrow that I point at myself I call it the perfectionist. And I call it the perfectionist because he wants everything to be absolutely perfect. And if I don't live up to that, I literally get beat up, and then he laughs in my face as he pushes my face into the water. He lets me up for air every once in a while, but that's about it, right? Now, I give those words and I give that description because it's powerful for me. That's what it feels like. So once I feel the perfectionist taking over, I have a place to put it, right? Okay, it's the perfectionist. The perfectionist tells me if I don't live up to its standards, I'm going to get hurt. That's the emotional narrative that I tell myself. It took me a long time to figure that out. But man, is it empowering. You know why? Because now I can talk back to it. So now, whenever somebody's in the background looking at me, staring at me while I'm doing the video, I know that they're not thinking, oh, what is he talking about? He's not making any sense. I can talk back to that perfectionist. Or I can say, they're looking because they're intrigued about what you're saying. They're looking because they care about what you're doing. I can talk back to it, and I might not believe it, but I can talk back to it, and I give that feeling a voice, and then I give it the truth. I give it the voice, and I give it the truth. And we'll talk about that here in a second, the truth, right? Inside of that, you can also identify the bodily response that you're feeling. So actually, what we found is that our feelings are almost secondary to that automatic response that we feel. So the tightness in my chest, the increase in my heartbeat, the feeling like I might, pass out, like all those feelings, I identify them. I know what that is now, right? I know what that is. That's actually my bodily response, and then the feeling comes that I'm not cared about, I'm not safe, I'm not in control, and then the thought comes of what I just talked about. So if I can identify the feeling, what I can do is I can take a deep breath in, really deep breath in, think about actually maybe something that I want to live into. Maybe it's peace, maybe it's comfort, maybe it's a truth that I've seen before. I can borrow it from a different experience. I can breathe in, think about that, and exhale, and then I can walk away from that feeling that I've had. I walk away and I think about I'm at peace, I have God's peace, I have will, I have love, I am loved, I am cared about. Look at all the people who love you, look at your wife, look at all the things, all the people, your community around you. And then I can breathe in, think about that feeling I felt, think about how much it's troubling me, and I can exhale, I have peace, I am okay, I can find safety wherever I am at. Look at all the people who are there for, look at how God has shown up in your life time and time again. You hear what I'm saying? It is so powerful to do that, right? Feel it and then let it go. And then the last thing, which is going to bring me to my last and final kind of takeaway, is I kind of alluded to it, the speaking the lies into the perfectionist, right? And what is the ultimate way to speak a lie into perfectionists? For me, it's finding truth. And where do I find truth? I find truth in music. When I am struggling, when I am weak, when I don't feel like I can go on, when I feel like all I'm doing is getting through the storm, I'm trying to look at Jesus, but all I feel is the water consuming me, right? What do? I pour into music. For me, it's so important. Why? Because those are the messages that I want coming in. Maybe it's scripture, maybe you read scripture. Pour into things that allow you to know truth. Not the world truth, like the truth, right? And sometimes I have to borrow that joy. I don't have enough joy sometimes to overcome what I'm dealing with. One of my 3 favorite words is joy. If you look at my website, my purpose, the reason I'm here is to find purpose in other people, to allow people to find joy and hope. Those are my 3 most desired things in life, and sometimes I don't have enough joy for myself. I have to borrow it. I have to borrow it from something greater than me, something bigger than me, right? Man, that's so important. Yeah, and the last point is to live into the Word, right? When I don't have it together, the truth is I don't have it together. The truth is most of the time, I don't have the joy that I want, right? I have to live into the Word and borrow that joy. One of my favorite verses is Nehemiah 8:10. Oh my gosh, guys, this is so incredible, right? This was actually after the exile. If you have read the Old Testament, the Jewish people, they're broken. They have been completely decimated, right? They are on their own. God has seemingly abandoned them, and they have nothing left. The temple is ruined, and they have to go back and try to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem. And Nehemiah does this after all the prophets have come, after all of this absolute horrendous suffering. They had suffering that we've never seen before. People were boiling their own children. Why? Because out of desperation to eat that. It was awful. It was the most horrendous thing you can ever do. And yet, God was there, right? Nehemiah 8:10, my favorite. The joy of the Lord is my strength. Man, is that powerful, right? I don't have enough joy. Sometimes I can't show up. Sometimes I am so weak, I don't think that God can speak through me, but the joy of the Lord is my strength. He showed up then. He shows up now. He continues to show up for us, in us, with us, despite us, not because of us, because He wants to use us to show light to the world, right? We are blessed beyond the curse, right? We are blessed beyond that curse of our sorrow, and we can find joy even when we don't feel like we have it, we can borrow it. So that's kind of what I want to leave you with, my friends. It truly is, like I said at the beginning, my joy, my pleasure to be here with you. And God's peace be with everyone. Thank you.